Good afternoon and welcome to Embry-Riddle's Gail Lemron Auditorium for the next installment in the speaker series. Data retrieval, protection, and usage is on everyone's mind who's in business, whether it be in the aerospace, airline, or general aviation community, or in general business, those people who want to protect the rights and property. Intellectual property theft is a huge concern, and there are many players out there, including some countries who are not friendly to us. So in this installment, we present a very special guest who has spent considerable time on campus today. She is the CISO and Vice President, Enterprise Risk and Compliance for Spirit AeroSystems. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Stacy Mill.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a wonderful visit to campus. What a beautiful place that you have to study here and learn. So very privileged to be here. And again, today we're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugliest, or as I like to call it, sorry teacher, the hacker ate my homework. And one of the things in our exciting adventure today, because cybersecurity is always looked upon as kind of a dull topic. I want to try to spiff it up a little bit. Would love your interactions. Please save your questions, and let's have a really collaborative session today. So we're going to set the stage. What is cybersecurity? Why do I need security? What should I secure? Where do I start? And where is it? It's about data, right? Or is it about networks? We're going to talk about that today. The other thing is who's after it, and what type of things do they do to get in? And at the very end, I'll wrap up with my E4 strategy about how to communicate cybersecurity, risk, compliance, any of that across an organization, campus, or just in a general conversation. So why do students care about cybersecurity? The good. 2,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs right now. They're waiting for the students, waiting for that thought leadership. The other thing is there are over 1.5 million unfilled by 2020. It is growing exponentially. As I stand here, there's another 1,000 jobs that need to be filled. People are realizing it every 5 minutes, okay? But most importantly, there's going to be 3.5 million by 2021. Because industries like aerospace are just now becoming, or in manufacturing, I should say, as well, are just now becoming into the cyberspace. They're moving out of the pen and paper and into that automation, artificial intelligence, as well as the global communication now, where everything used to be siloed. It's now open. It's on this wonderful thing called the internet. So let's take a look at the bad. $3 trillion in cybersecurity losses by 2020. $3 trillion. That's more than some countries' full budget. And it's only going to grow. Aviation is now on that top 10 list. And the reason being is because of Russia, China, North Korea. They're all after our intellectual property. We've spent decades building out the aerospace industry. Wouldn't it be easier to just go and find the information in 5 minutes, take all that 10 years and all of those multi-million, trillions of dollars that we spend on the aerospace industry to improve it every year, and just take the information, not have to buy it? That's what's happening. And we're seeing that every day. We're seeing that across spearfishing in particular. So I'll go ahead and pop this out. They're mapping our suppliers. We are getting emails from suppliers that we deal with every day that are fake, that have fake invoices in them, that are carrying payloads that are very destructive to networks and try to capture our intellectual property. That's new. That's just within this last couple of years. They're mapping our customers, and they look so real, these emails that come in. We'll talk a little bit more about how security was done over the 90s, into 2000s, and today. all it takes is an email. All it takes. Think about that. We can build the best systems in the world, but if we get the right email to the right person with the right payload, it takes all of that thousands and thousands, millions of dollars and millions of hours of work away. And then lastly, they're mapping our executives and their direct reports. So what that means is they've taken social engineering off the phone, although that still happens some, to say, hi, I'm calling for the CEO. He needs something right now. Can you send me this money right away? And they're turning that into email, and they're turning that not only into phone call, but they will send the email behind it. They will spoof an email that says it's from our CEO or from our chief controllers or from our financial advisors to say, you gotta do this right now. So education is the key to that. The one thing I want to leave you with today, educate, educate, educate. Because not everybody's a cybersecurity expert. And even myself, I call myself one of the best testers ever because I want to know. And everybody's inquisitive. They want to click on that, and they want to do a good job for their bosses. So we have to take the fear, uncertainty, and doubt out of our daily lives and not just live by our emails. We have to live by interaction. We're seeing more and more of that every day. Because in this example here, it looked exactly like it came from the email did. It came from one of our suppliers. It was exact watermarks, things of that nature. And it was an invoice we pay every month. So why wouldn't we pay it? Thank goodness there just happened to be one little caveat on it, and there was a call made. And actually what happened as they opened the attachment, our AV system said, wait a minute, something's wrong, but they didn't know what. So if it hadn't been for a little bit of a flag and the person going, wait a minute, I usually don't see a flag on something, on one of the antivirus systems. What's going on here? They could have easily just passed that up. That's why education is the key. People have to question. So that's the bad. Let's talk a little bit about the ugliest, and it's getting uglier every day. $6 trillion in losses by 2021. $6 trillion. How much money could that take to build better programs, to build better education systems? Think about it. There actually is no global internet protections. So if we take this into the physical realm, we have physical protections against some type of warfare. For instance, if someone flies into our airspace, we know it, we defend, and we get them out, right? Whether it's they fly their way out or not. We don't do that for cyber. We know the bad guys are out there, the threat actors are out there, but we're not doing anything to proactively stop them. And that's across the globe. Unless you talk about countries in the nature of Russia and China and Korea that own their internet spaces. They own them. They are the ones who make the determination of who comes in and out. So that's the far right, if you will, or I should say far left example of they own the internet, they allow what's in and what's out, whereas the U.S. and European Union, things of that nature, have not gone that far and don't want to go that far. I don't want my government to own what I'm doing and what I'm seeing or allowing me to do that. But we have to do something. We can't just allow that to be open airspace in the cyber world. Remember, World Wide Web, WWW, that's where the internet started. That was the first name of the internet. Internet of Things. We're seeing new challenges. Our lovely iPhones and our lovely iWatches, things of that nature, Internet of Things. Why couldn't they take pictures? They can download information, and they can walk right out of your systems with it on their hands, okay? So that's one of the things. How do we detect Internet of Things? How do we stop Internet of Things? And I have a whole presentation on the Internet of Things. I wanted to mention it because that is another new risk landscape that we're dealing with in the aerospace industry. So we've gone from, and people don't like to have to leave their phones at the door, leave them in a locker. They don't want to have to not have the coolest gadget on their hands, especially as we look at the age of the industry, which the age of the aerospace industry right now, and I'll use Spirit as an example, is 50 to 60% retirement age. We have to educate that next group of not only engineers, but of cyber engineers, because a plane now, anything aerospace now is completely technology. It's not just launch and see what happens. Fly and see if we get there. There's all kinds of data passing along the way, whether it's air control, whether it's monitoring of missile systems, things of that nature. So keep that in the back of your mind too. If I allow the Internet of Things to actually be an enabler for the aerospace industry, right now we kind of look at it as a threat. It's my mission in life to make sure we have these things as enablers, and that cybersecurity is an enabler to the business, not a stop, okay? Where early on it was, oop, can't do that, oop, can't do that, it's too dangerous. I challenge each of you to think, why can't we do that? How do we do that and make it secure? Trade sanctions and geopolitical climate. There's two other, very ugly right now. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing so much from Russia and China against the aviation areas, because we're not sharing. We're not sharing that information. We're not trying to come together as a global organization, not only as a global world on the internet, but also in aviation. It's always who's the first there. So as President Kennedy say, we do this not because it is easy, but because it is hard. It is hard, and we're not sharing. And so it's been a fight to who gets there first, rather than a how do we do this together and make it a better world. Last but not least, we need more cybersecurity programs. You've heard about how many jobs there are, just millions of jobs unfilled, but trillions of dollars being lost. We need programs at not only a government level, but academia level, completely through to our suppliers as well as our corporations. Both in aerospace and in manufacturing. Aerospace and manufacturing are late to the game. They're 10 years behind other organizations, because cybersecurity really started with more of, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but banking is big on cybersecurity, and so is, you wouldn't believe this, but PCI, payment card industry standards, so are restaurants, so is retail. So we've moved past that. It didn't really help us, did it? There's still a lot of people in those third-party support. So if we talk about Target, it was their AVHC people who got hacked, and then it came in and hacked Target, right? When we talk about Home Depot was their point of sale servicing was hacked, and that's how they got in. So you have to monitor every aspect of what's coming in, coming out, and your third parties. Manufacturing hasn't done that in building of airplanes, in building of anything, because it's about, do I have the parts, can I put out my widget, right? But along the line, they have to automate their systems to put out more widgets faster, and they have to be able to protect their intellectual property so they can save their margins. So let's talk a little bit about what cybersecurity is. So early cybersecurity was about preventing people from getting in, prevent them, keep them out, watch the gate, and build our castle to protect our crown jewels, build our walls high and our moats steep. And it was IT's job to keep their eye on the prize. That's what used to be good, but it's not good enough anymore. It's the basics. That's the basics. You still have to have the preventative model. Now we're into a resiliency model where You have to be able to detect that someone's coming in. It's no longer as if we get hacked. It's every day something's happening, whether it's a virus, whether it's a phishing email to try to get you to connect, to click on something or download a bad file. So everybody has got to be educated on this. They've got to be able to watch the data. We still have to lock down critical infrastructure. We still have to put security around that. But again, it's all about the data and expecting the unexpected. You have to look for anomalies. That's what it means. So my day-to-day looks like this landscape, right? Well, when I see changes in that landscape, what's causing that? And be able to understand, do I have an issue? That's a big change. So when you're talking about crown jewels, I always get a giggle out of this. I'm talking about intellectual property, financial information, personal information, as well as those critical mission infrastructures, legal documents, contracts. It's very important. These are the things that make a corporation run. These are the things that make a program run. And if any of this is lost along the way, it causes an issue to that program. So again, what is it? What are crown jewels? Any information or systems that provide a competitive advantage and support strategic business objectives. Only sentence I could come up with to really sum it up. Okay? It's the core of what you need to do business. Where are the crown jewels and who do we support it? Well, it takes a village to support a corporation. This is where my talk goes into third parties. So third parties support your systems, just like we talked about Target, we talked about the big breach at Home Depot. Sony is where we saw a big change along the way because it went after not just people's identity. Now they're sold for pennies on the dollar. How many times have we all in this room had our credit cards breached or our debit cards breached or found, even I have had my identity stolen. I've had one of my children had their identity stolen. Having to get that back and get everything lined out is very hard. But they couldn't make money after, really. It started that way, and they were making money that way. And when I say they, I mean the threat actors. Now they're not. Now they're after intellectual property. They can sell that and make millions of dollars for one piece of intellectual property. So why not go after something low and slow, make a big bang out of it, rather than trying to go after thousands of people's information just to make a buck off of it, okay? And your information, when you talk about supporting systems, as we did earlier, you're also talking about mobile devices, cloud, and business partners. You have to, it takes a village. So there's many third parties that I work with, and our companies work with, our colleges work with, fill in the blank, that it's not just a closed loop system anymore. So why do we care? Financial, fines, operational, reputational. I call this the what for. So what, now what, why do I care? I care because there's fines. I care because we can lose funding in academia if we can prove that we can't keep our intellectual property tight. And then there's also litigation. You're not seeing the large litigation you did before on people losing, their Social Security numbers, their credit cards, because we are becoming numb to it. It happens so much now. So if we were having this conversation 5 years ago when Sony hit, it would be much different than it is now. I will tell you, e-commerce, making sure your supply chain's good, just like the example I gave earlier. Critical infrastructure, what if they were able to shut down the power grids? What would happen? Chaos, right? It'd be pretty scary because that's what runs water, sewage, our lights, electrical, all of that is all tied into that one critical infrastructure. And so large-scale bad press, customer trust, even lives lost when we talk about in hospital systems. If they were able to take out a power grid, There's going to be people that are going to lose their lives. Okay? Next slide is a revolving threat landscape. So this is really where I want to talk about how it started in people's basements. Hey, what can I do? Can I get in this system? I remember when I was in college in the lab, in the computer lab, I have a degree in computer science, mathematics, history, and statistics. Saw a guy come in, 2 suits come in, they walk in, they grab a guy off the computer lab, he walks out, we never see him again. Really spooky. And we're like, what did this guy do? How could this be? He had actually hacked into the University of Kentucky systems because all of the colleges were interconnected, okay? There was no security on the system, and it was pay for grade. So if you paid the guy, he'd change your grades. And he got found out. Well, that's very minuscule right now. We think about it, it's funny, it's cool. But that's really how it started. Then we move into more of the criminal type of cyber warfare, if you will. I know warfare is the last on there, but I consider each one of these now warfare. The criminal being more going after your intellectual property and after your financial information so that they can make money after it. Also espionage. Nation states, they're after our IP. Other companies after other companies' IPs, which we don't see so much of in the U.S., but we do see a lot of it outside of the U.S. Last but not least, terrorism, taking down that core infrastructure. One of the very first things, I think it was it's been less than 10 years, but it really it shook up the world on cybersecurity with Stuxnets, Stuxnet. Look that up. And that was where there was a hack into an Iranian nuclear power plant. And it even shows how they were able to get, it doesn't show how they were able, but what you'll see if you Google it is you will see a generator just start to malfunction and blow up. What if that was the core of the power plant? Okay, and they did it across the internet. No one's claimed the tag of who did it. There's a lot of speculation around it, but it happened, and that's the core thing. And it happened about 10 years ago. So you started to see people hardening the perimeters of their networks. But now data's everywhere. Information's everywhere. You have subcontractors doing your work. You also have a lot of things in the cloud. So who's protecting that? And by the way, I'm a big cloud fan now, but if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been a little scary. Last but not least, warfare, where nation states are using computer systems to attack each other, to change things. Right now we have a big discussion in the works about political, in the last election. Was someone actually able to hack in and do something and change something? We don't know, we haven't proven that. That's the danger, we don't know. That's why you have to look for anomalies. So last but not least, how do they get in? Either do it by compromising a system or by compromising people. A little bit of both. So if they map the whole company, or if they map the whole college, they know who's on first, what's on second, who do I call to get the most important things done? I'm going to call the controllers. I'm going to call the OAs. I'm going to call the admins, because they're the ones that make things happen. Also, I'm going to use big names, so it scares them, and say, I need it now. That's why we've educated across all the industries I've been in, question. It's okay to question. Let's make sure it's right. Let's do face-to-face, phone-to-phone, whatever it might take, but make sure you're checking things before you take something off an email. Then last but not least, what is E4? So I developed this as a way to communicate to various different industries and various different levels. So first and foremost, education is the key of yourself, your business partners, and that you build these continuously evolving awareness programs. It's not a one and done. Not a one and done. So I have 2 education 1-hour educations a year for my corporation, and then every month I come out with something else. And usually it's very small. I want it to fit on a phone, and I want it to have an attachment that might be, and it's always something fun, so I'm gamifying it so that I can get more attention. Enable. You have to, business relationships, I can't say enough about that. If we're going to win in this fight, we're going to have to build relationships across government, industry, and across geopolitical lines. We cannot do this as an individual, corporation, company, university. We have to do this as a collective. Much like there's a NATO for physical security, there's no such thing for cybersecurity. So I stand forward and I challenge that. Why don't we have a NATO-type situation for cybersecurity? Last but not least, you enable the proper tool sets, the proper controls, make sure people know why those policies and standards are there. Then monitor your risk. Have things changed? Has my organization changed? Whatever it might be, we have something new coming out. What's the new things coming up with hackers? So I have guys that are literally sitting in the dark net, which is just the internet. There's no separate internet that's called the dark net. It's just different areas in the dark net where bad people are talking about bad things. So let's be part of it and hear the conversation, because they're not protecting it either. And hold people accountable. Can't say enough about that. People want to do the easiest path to get to their endpoint, to their destination. Some of this is tough. Let's hold them accountable. Let's judge them against this, and let's make sure that they have there's ramifications to everyone's actions, even if they're what I call unintended consequences. Last but not least, all of these things, to educate first, enable people, have them understand before you go to enforcement, but you have to evolve your program constantly, because there's always new business channels, there's always new risk landscapes coming upon the scene, and you have to be ready for those. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'll take questions now. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacy Mill. We're going to go very quickly to questions because of our time limitations. So we ask students and those who are interested in putting a question to Stacy, come to the microphones, we'll call upon you, and we'll get your answers. In listening to your presentation, Stacy, I have to ask, do you think, in your opinion, are we staying even, falling behind, or are we getting a handle on cyber hacking?
We're always behind. It's a reactive mode right now. It still is, and it has been for a long time. We're getting better as corporations, but we're not getting better as countries. So we're having to defend a global world from our own little chasms, from our own little spots. We're not doing anything at our borders. We're not doing it. So again, I hearken this back to physical security controls. Think about that versus cybersecurity controls. We're not doing both. We're doing one well. We haven't even started on the other.
How much of the protection will have to come from the private sector as opposed to having a government partnership with the private sector to get control of security?
It's 100% private sector right now. I know that there's a lot of partnerships, and I've been on those, whether it's overseas a Security Advisory Council, Information Assurance Work Group for Department of Defense. We've always tried to bring them together. I work very closely with some FBI groups, but people are scared to self-report. There's still a reluctance for self-reporting. We have to get that fear, uncertainty, and doubt out of the way, and that will allow government, and that will allow more of a global viewpoint in that. And I'm not just saying this about the U.S. My biggest thing is about us as a global, like NATO. We all have to work on this together to stop it.
Comments? Dr. P. Barry Butler, the president of Embry-Riddle, with the first comment. I'm sorry, Dr. Butler, I should have seen you coming. Go ahead.
It's okay. First of all, great presentation. When you talk about a global sort of NATO, you use the word NATO, and you just said you're pulling in different countries with different standards. Right now, not on security, but on data sharing,
Yep.
the EU has completely different standards in terms of you have to sort of opt in, I guess, to share your information. And much different already, even at that level, and it's not even security. Is it a doable thing, I guess, when you have sort of different sort of baseline standards of what information sharing is all about between the EU and the United States right now?
Right. Thank you for that question. I use it as that's my high water mark, is the EU Data Privacy Act. You also have 50 different data sharing acts in the United States. Each country, I'm sorry, it's 48. Each state has their own rules. Massachusetts and California being the highest, EU being the highest in the globe, but there's also Swiss, German, as well as Indian and now Australian that have all started. So each country now is starting to even develop their own standards. So what I like to march towards is what is the highest standard? They're all almost the same, but EU is much stricter in privacy, much more than data sharing. You can share the data if you can prove it's private, and you can share the data if I have a way to pull my personal data out. They're much more focused on the privacy of data than they are of the security of the infrastructure.
Open to your questions right over here.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I have a question. Do you think that part of the reason we're behind in security is because when someone develops a security system, they don't necessarily want to share it because in doing so, they're basically telling the hackers how to break into their system? I know it's a big problem in software architecture is companies don't want to give out their architecture because then other people can just copy it. Do you think software security has the same problem?
Absolutely. But I think it has to come, everybody wants to be first to market. So to your point, in the defense of attacks, rather than being proactively coding to prevent that happening, now it's all about what happens, what are we going to do when it does happen. So yeah, there's so many. There's just dozens and dozens and dozens of companies in the cyber or in the security space, and they all overlap. They all kind of do it the same way, but they don't. So there's no integrated end-to-end. And if anybody ever comes to you and tries to sell you something that says we're an integrated end-to-end self-defending network, there's no such thing. So you're absolutely right. There's a fear, uncertainty, and doubt to share anything, whether it's proactive or reactive, and we have to bring that together.
In a broad sense, knowing the thievery that's out there, is there a role where the State Department and the Federal Trade Commission are actively trying to help with the solution, or are they not involved at this point?
Well, I would say they are involved, but the enforcement is really what we're not seeing. So there's the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. DoD has standard security technology implementation guidelines, or called STIGs. We're not seeing them applied, and we're not seeing people being held accountable for it. So that was one of the things when I came back into a pseudo DoD defense area, because we're not a prime. I was very surprised to hear that we weren't there's not an audit program for that. And now, the way that I look at it is, it's so broad and it affects so many different industries that the government hasn't been able to really figure out, how do we do this? How do we hold people accountable to a certain standard?
In the run-up to this appearance at Embry-Riddle, you and I had a chance to talk. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by some of the other companies that you've worked for, and I thought it would be great to share that with the students as well.
Sure.
Your career trajectory is a remarkable one. And I asked you before we started today about the experience with the Yum brands. There were 120 countries involved. You had various products you had to protect. What was that experience like for those who are wanting to come into the field of information and protection that you're in?
Well, I will tell you, I started at YUM in 2007, and it was all about PCI compliance, payment card industry compliance, making sure that we could take credit card transactions. It quickly changed after we started to do big data on our customers and figure out what do they like, things of that nature, where are they buying, where's the best places to put the stores. So back to...
Did you have to worry about product protection? Somebody stealing
Not so
recipes?
much.
Somebody stealing marketing?
You know, that's so funny. Everybody used to ask me, where's the secret for KFC? So Yum Brands is KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. And so where's the secret recipe for KFC? There isn't one spot that's in, by the way. There's a piece of it here, a piece of it there. And I think somewhere there's the one overall recipe. The big difference was that coming from a DoD perspective, so I really call it coming from Fort Knox to Berkeley in the 60s. You know, free love, open access, why do I need to lock this down? Questions like, why do I need a password? And it wasn't until how I fit that in. We had the PCI first, okay, so I had a reg to march to. But the second one was theft. How do we prevent the theft? And that was through the cameras, through the systems, through the monitoring, and that was a big change for Yum Brands in that last decade. Now everything is done biometrically, dual factor with biometrics and PINs. So if you'll walk up to even at McDonald's, if you'll walk up, you'll notice that they are doing biometrics and they're doing PINs. Because that's the standards now for the larger food service industries. But it was a big change for me, and it was a big discussion because we're selling chicken, pizza, and tacos. Why do I need to secure that? Well, I need to secure that because I need to be able to make sure my systems are available. I need to make sure that no one's tracking my credit card transactions, because earlier they were a cash-based system, not credit cards. So the evolution, as I said before, of different sales chains, if you will, has really what's changed that.
You know, Embry-Riddle's profile of students has changed greatly over the last few years. Through the leadership of presidents like Dr. Butler, we have a larger female population and student involvement, and the career opportunities are virtually unbridled. All kinds of things can happen. What's the prospect? You went through a time where there was a lot of change in the industry, working your way up, and you fought your way up. What's the opportunity like for female graduates now?
It's wide open. Oh my gosh, please, please, please. And it's wide open for really anybody. But for females, we're less than 1%, and we're even less than that in the leadership in the CISO industries. So, Chief Information Security Officers. I can't say enough, go for it. Female, male, it doesn't matter. I do want more and more, we talked about this earlier with Ramsey about how we're raised. So I was never raised, I was raised by an Army colonel and a lot of brothers. So I was never, I never thought another thing about going into STEM. My family was in STEM. Now my daughters haven't gone into STEM, but I would say that it is wide open. We really need to bring diversity to the table, diversity of thought, background, race, religion, gender. So for me, it's a wide open field for females, as well as a lot of different backgrounds.
We're also incorporating your questions, so please, anyone from the general audience, please come up to our microphones in the precious minutes that we have with Stacy. Looking ahead, you showed losses. You, in your presentation, talked about what's going to happen in the next few years. Will some companies, unless they come into a stronger method of defense, go out of business? I have to believe so.
Absolutely, and some already have. Some already have, especially when I was dealing with in retail food service, there was a lot of companies that went out of business. Now you're seeing companies go out of business not because of just security, because of the way that supply chain has changed. We order a lot of stuff online. We're not going to brick and mortar like we did before. You're also seeing, a lot of change in online, so e-commerce, as far as changing of information between corporations, between that and the government now. So the most important thing to really understand about that is you've got to watch the data. So it used to be watch the money. Now it's watch the data. Where is the data? How is it protected? And does it need to be protected? So not everything needs to be protected. So when we started in the early 90s with the DoD STIGs, it was more about lock everything down. So we locked everything down, PCs wouldn't run, servers wouldn't run, the network was full of chatty Cathy stuff, and it was really very, very inefficient. Now we're looking at, okay, I want to know just this about the data. So instead of building our walls high and our moats deep, we need to build those walls high and moats deep around the data, and that data is everywhere. So that's what's really changing the industry.
I'm curious about this. The Wall Street Journal had a story about multi-mergers over the next few years. Undoubtedly, you saw that. Today, Pabst and Miller have sort of worked out their differences. When all of these mergers are happening, does everybody's walls go up even higher because they don't want to give anything up before the merger happens? How do you protect your company if you're going to merge with another company?
That's a great question, because I do a lot of M&A, especially when I was with CAR. We had 18 companies under our holding company. And those, we acquired about 12 of those within 6 years. So it was boom, 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 boom. And so, yeah, there is a lot of lack of sharing, but that's changing now, because that's the first thing I want to ask. So I'm on a lot of M&A teams. I've always been for all my corporations, and just for that reason. I want to know, are we buying something that's already been compromised? Are we buying something that we're going to have to put millions of dollars into the security of the systems, or even the upgrade of the systems? So remember, cybersecurity and security is more about the CIA, about the confidentiality of the information, the integrity of the information, but that availability. Are our systems up? Are they running? Am I keeping them current? Am I maintaining, monitoring, and managing them? So there's a lot to cybersecurity than just putting up a firewall.
Over here, a question now for Stacy.
Hello, I'm Daniela. I'm studying aviation business administration, and I'm focusing in the supply chain management with aerospace and aerospace engineering. So I was wondering, which are the main things I have to take care of when I actually get into the job of supply chain in my area?
Great question. I actually work with a lot of supply chain management. So all of the regulations, policies, and standards that affect you as a corporation affect your supply chain. That's what people forget. They think, oh, okay, they're making this small widget, or I'm getting, chicken from this company. They're part of your supply chain, so they're part of your company. So you have to make sure in your contracts and your terms and conditions that you're holding them accountable to the same regulations and the same security posture that you are as an organization.
Once again, for the benefit of the students, and we're taking your questions, what education and training is necessary for someone to become a Stacy Mill?
Oh, wow. So I came in with computer science and mathematics. Add to that, and I used to make fun of the computer information systems guys and girls, add business discussions on top of that, especially international business. That's the one thing I would add. Also, I want to take this back to the aerospace industry. I would add business speak, whatever you have to do to be able to talk business, and some technology, some at least basic technology classes, N+, S+, things of that nature, to make sure that you're getting a good foundation so that you've educated yourselves and know what your risk landscape in, and you can partner with the guys who keep, and guys and girls that keep up with that every day.
Again, not to go too far into the weeds, but I'm curious because of all the companies you've worked for. Is there some sort of a super confidentiality agreement that comes into the employment because you've learned about systems, protection, gathering information? You're not going to give away state secrets like recipes and things, but you learn methodology. Are you allowed to use what you learn in terms of methodology when you go to another company? And I say that for the benefit of students who will be on their own career track.
Well, you have to. I mean, we all take what we learn with us every day. So for example, with Humana, we were learning about it as we went. It was late 90s, early 2000s, Department of Defense. A Department of Defense audit consisted of a group coming in with pen and paper and saying, "Are you secure?" "Yep." "Okay, good. Thank you very much." About a 4-hour meeting, and they were gone. After that, within a year or so of that, it was 2 or 3 weeks of a auditor coming in and running scans across your systems and asking questions of everyone, and it was just absolutely to the opposite side. So one of the things I'm most proud of in my career was I was able to work with the auditors, work with the Department of Defense, and say, what's the right thing to do? What's the best thing to do? And so Humana Military was the first prime contractor under DoD Information Technology Security Accreditation Program to be certified in 4 days and out. They didn't have to come back. They didn't have to stay for weeks, because what I did was I asked the DoD and was working with them on what do we need to do and how does it need to look. So to make sure that our systems were performing at that level. And if they weren't, I knew where we lacked, and I was able to talk with them before they came for the audits. So again, education, 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 and that saved us a lot of time, money, and effort, and saved the government a lot of time, money, and effort.
And I think about all the money. If you have a question, come right to our microphones, and you can ask this. I think we have another person. Please, your question now for Stacy.
That's a feat in high heels all the way from the top. Hi, Stacy. Nice to meet you. I'm like, please bring the microphone up there. Wendy Cappers, Faculty for Information Security and Assurance.
If you could get a little closer to the mic.
I'll just bend over. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann.
Wendy Cappers, Information Security and Assurance faculty member. We keep speaking about policies and regulations. My students have a real big problem with the coding aspect. Can you speak to how much responsibility should be placed on the coders, and how do we change that?
Absolutely, great question. So anytime you're developing, whatever you're using, whether it's an agile approach or a waterfall approach, each piece along the way, you have to be thinking about what am I asking for, and what are my threats? Who's going to maybe come after this? And I remember in the early days when I was dealing with different coding groups, and again, I'm an old coder from way back, ones and zeros, assembly. I would ask them, what's the purpose of the product? What's the output of the product? And how are you bringing information in and bringing information out? So early on, no one was checking for somebody being a bad guy. They just trusted it, that someone's going to put their name in a name field, that someone's going to put their phone number in a phone number field. Actually, what was happening was we were seeing commands being loaded into those fields or into the code, and then there was no checks and balances within the code. So what I always say when I speak to a coding group, make sure you've got checks and balances along the way so that things are operating as you expect them to. Look for the anomalies. A lot about cybersecurity is not about watching what someone's doing. You're looking for something that shouldn't be happening. So it's very important along the way, every step of the development, that you are documenting, here's the baseline of how my code should work. What do I do if something is left of center, and how do I protect against that? So be looking for it along the way, every step along the way. Any data input, output, any functions you're running along that. If something doesn't look right, stop. Make sure you have a check and balance in there.
As it relates to being a CISO, how often is it that you may find that you have a mole in a company and they are using the system to either sell or disseminate information outside?
Well, this is where non-disclosure comes in. So, no, just kidding. We find it quite often. We have not found anything like that at Spirit, but I have to say there hasn't been a company that I've been at that we have, people just do bad things.
Yeah.
Whether it's, stealing from the till at the restaurant, or if it's, the most important thing is that holding people accountable for anomalous activity. Sometimes it's unintended consequences. They just didn't know, or they didn't mean to, but there are others. So insider threat is one of the big things that has really grown over the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years, and especially since Edward Snowden. We're watching for people who have access. What are they doing with their access? And if you have an elevated access, we're looking for time parameters. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, Betty works an 8 to 5 from Kansas. Why is Betty working now 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on something? And we're even locking down some of those accesses so that you have to make a call. You have to have someone initiate the access for an admin rather than them having anytime, anywhere, all-time access. It's just the nature of the beast.
What was it that attracted you to Spirit AeroSystems?
Wow. The biggest thing for me, being an Army brat, was the defense industry. The second thing was the multi-generational people that work at Spirit work there for life. Their children work there, their grandchildren work there, and that sense of family. But most importantly, I think it was just the aspect of a new industry for me. I've never been in aerospace before, but I'm a recovering engineer, and I wanted to really live in that aspect once again.
I know students want to know if there was an especially difficult challenge you had on the way up and how you overcame that challenge.
Biggest challenge was getting people on board, getting people to listen, because it's not going to happen to us. We just sell chicken. I can't tell you how many times I heard that at Yum, but we just sell chicken. Why do they care? Well, they care because you also are taking credit cards and you're collecting information on your customers. That's why they care, because then they can build. McDonald's had a particular one. If you might remember the Monopolies game.
Yes.
From McDonald's. Well, they had a particular hack in that someone went in and was able to get that email list from a third-party email, third-party email system, got McDonald's Monopoly list and sent everything out and said, hey, you've won, click here. Well, what's in that click here was a malicious download. So I've got lots of stories about that across different industries.
As you spoke, I was wondering, how did they work out the deal with Milton Bradley to use Monopoly without saying, hey, this is intellectual property, it's too much like our game? But they
We
worked
called
on it.
board games, money talks, and a lot of people aren't doing board games anymore. So it was a way for Milton Bradley to make money.
Good for them. Disney has had a similar problem to some of the things you've talked about today,
Yeah.
and that is people will take their intellectual images, some of their ideas, and try to make them their own, and they police them very heavily.
Very heavily.
Do they work the same way that you guys kind of work in your business?
Absolutely. Now, I've never worked for Disney, but absolutely. There's always now there's groups that do social media reviews. There's groups that are always monitoring the internet for intellectual property use. I can't tell you dozens of times over my career that I've worked very closely with legal to do cease and desist along the way, because we see it. When I was with KFC, when I was with Yum, we would see fake KFC ordering sites all over the globe. So at one point in time, we did a search, and we thought we had about 25 online ordering sites. We found over 700. 700 sites. And most of those were fake sites. So we went through and did, again, this is the very early days. This is early, 2008, 2009, because people were like, if I build it, they will come, because people just would Google KFC, okay, here's what I want to do, here's my information. And it may have actually then followed into a real order site. So there was that man in the middle kind of thing. So you can ask me lots of questions. There's nothing I haven't seen.
I was going to say, how close do you have to work with legal?
Oh,
Probably very close.
What's really funny is this is the first time I've ever reported. I report to the chief legal officer. So I don't report into IT. I don't report into technology. It's so freeing, because when you're fighting against, in the same group, for funding, for staffing, and it's kind of a little bit of the fox watching the hen house. It's always going to go to the IT new whiz-bang system. It's not going to go to the defense of those systems.
We have one more sweep to the audience. For anyone who has a question, please. Your question. Thanks for coming back. You've been to so many of our speaker events.
Well, I've been here for a long time too, so I'm excited to graduate this semester. But thanks for coming out and sharing your time with us today. As I understand it, you have a background in kind of commercial markets and also sort of government, more private work. I was just wondering if you found any barriers to innovation more counterproductive to ensuring security in either kind of area of work. You mentioned earlier that we're behind as a whole, and I'm wondering if maybe one industry or another is more behind in the kind of work that they're doing to ensure security and the types of software they're putting out and things like that.
Well, I have to say, for me, I would say manufacturing is one of the ones that's the most behind, because that's just my experience. So I've had experience in healthcare, insurance, retail food service, automotive sales, dealer-to-dealer sales. And so I've worked globally, at least the last 10 years almost. More than that, God, I have to figure out how old I am sometimes. Each organization's different. So I could say insurance would be a big one I thought lagged behind, but they've spent the most money. So you can throw people and money at this all day long. It doesn't mean you're secure. You may be compliant, but you're not secure, and there's a difference between the two. The other thing for me has always been when we were looking at manufacturing, it was about producing that widget. It was about producing that piece. It wasn't until manufacturing got into the Department of Defense and Defense came down with regulations that you started to see security. So we have at Spirit confidential DoD, and it's very secure, very hardened, and we also have commercial sites. I did the same thing at Humana. So we had DoD and we had commercial. Getting the two separated was the first thing. We had to separate them, and then having a way to connect between the two has been very interesting. But really, all of this is, and I'll leave you with this: the Sony hack, the first one. It was the second one when they came in and they hacked Xbox Live. Well, the gamers were up in arms. It was like, how dare you? How dare you go after my gaming? That's when we really started to see a lot of grassroots efforts to deal with cybersecurity. Before that, it was a corporational, maybe a governmental issue in banking. Now it's everybody's on board with this. But we all have to be very vigilant and keeping things up to date and looking for things that are anomalous, because there's no special button that says this is how you secure it.
I want to thank Ann and Summer for working with us today, Daryl Labello for the video of today's presentation, and Tony Petro for running control. I want to tell you about our next event coming up. It'll be our final for the fall. This is going to be one no one will want to miss. He was in Congress for 24 years, Congressman John Mica, was the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, and of course, he is part of the Embry-Riddle family with Microplex. He will be our guest for a special event and sit-down discussion on the future of transportation December 4th. That's next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. The doors open at 6. We hope you join us here on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Once again, please, a warm applause for Stacy Mill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Have a very pleasant afternoon.